Welcome to episode 11 of The Tech Bubble. I'm your host Ian Williamson, and today we have a very special episode which engages with data privacy. By the time you listen to this humble offering, it will be Internet Safety Week at Southislandschool, so what better time to be considering our engagement with the online world, particularly with the furore surrounding WhatsApp in recent weeks. So Chloe, are you still using WhatsApp?
Hey dear listeners, it's so great to be back for our first episode of 2021. Mr. Williamson, I am still using WhatsApp for now, but there is a lot of discussion and debate at our council, at the DLC, and indeed school-wide about the suitability of the digital communications platforms used at schools. So, do we move to Slack, Signal, Discord?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a kind of democratic process so far, at least on the DLC, hasn't it? And one wonders if that's going to spread, and certainly a kind of authentic exploration of what's available out there. I know you've put a survey out into the field with the DLC, so what's it looking like at the moment? What's the front runner, Chloe?
The suspense is heavy, but the front runner is WhatsApp. So we haven't learned as a council, we have not learned, and we've really discussed running potential workshops to really inform our council about the gravity of this situation. And it's a process, so it's something we're working on.
It's interesting that though, isn't it, that even some of the more digitally literate students in school, the kind of things that they are sharing, the metadata that's coming from WhatsApp is perhaps yet to really concern them in the way that perhaps we might have imagined. Okay, so thanks Chloe, and congratulations on landing the role of the DLC coordinator alongside Anakin Wan. Anakin is now our editor of the show, by the way, for 2021. Richly deserved, Chloe, and as for Anakin, well, he gets to work in the recently vacated dungeon left by Jessica. So good luck to Anakin. Now, hold on a minute. Don't we have some guests to introduce today, Chloe?
We do indeed, and what a cool lineup we have in store for you today. First up, I am delighted to invite Janice Wong back onto the show for the second time. I've been very lucky to hear Janice speak both to my TOK class about data privacy issues and here on the Tech Bubble as well. So we last heard from Janice back in episode 9, and our former head girl graduated from SIS in 2014 before studying law at LSE. She's currently completing an interdisciplinary PhD in computer science at the University of St. Andrews, where she's researching the legal applications and ethical implications of privacy, data protection, and tech. So her thesis, correct me if I'm wrong, Janice, focuses on how data protection can be thought of as a common good to mitigate power imbalances between individuals and data users and companies. So a reminder, dear listeners, that you can visit her website at janicewong.org to check out some more of her intriguing work. So welcome back to the show, Janice. What have you been doing since we last spoke to you?
Thanks for having me back. It's really cool, and looking back, it's been a couple of months already, and I guess a lot's been happening between then. More research for sure as part of my PhD, and some of that includes making ethics applications for a study that I'm hoping to do to make sure participants understand how their data may be used and how they can opt out, even post participating in the study. I've been writing papers for conferences and attending a few conferences and events, all online as well. And in between the time since I was last on the podcast and now, I've also started a research fellowship part-time at the Open Data Institute, which is based in the UK.
Okay, and second up, we have Harpal Chima, part of the graduating class of 2003. Blimey, Harpal graduated before I even arrived at Southislandschool back in 2004. Harpal is currently based in the UK at Redstore, where he has worked for the last 8 years. His work focuses on data management and the ability to protect the most critical asset of almost all organizations, namely, yep, you guessed it, their data. His role within the business is predominantly sales focused, onboarding new customers, understanding their challenges, and educating them on the risks involved and the GDPR compliance requirements that businesses need to adhere to. Harpal, thank you very much for agreeing to appear on the Tech Bubble.
Thank you. Really appreciate having me here. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I can't believe it's been 18 years since I actually left South Island. I was only speaking to my wife last week saying I hadn't been home for nearly 3 years, and she actually corrected me by saying that this is your home now. As Ian introduced, I work in the IT industry for a company called Redstore, and our service is really focused around protecting data for organisations both in the public and the private sector. And interestingly enough, I never did IT in school. I never did anything IT focused at university. And actually, now when I look back, it is something, I wish someone had guided me or educated me how there is so much more to IT than just being, a techie. And having worked in IT now for 9 years, I've learned there's so many different personas, so many different roles and characters that fall into the industry, so to say. And as mentioned, the data protection, it's a very hot topic. And as the value of data grows, organizations are investing significantly to ensure that their data is protected, and importantly, they're able to recover their data in the event of deletion, ransomware, downtime, etc.
That's fantastic. It's great to have you on the show. I'm curious to know, Harpal, so back in 2003 when you left South Island, you said you never did IT at that time. Was there even an IT department in the school at that time?
There was an IT, I forgot his name, but he used to play rugby with us as well. Was it Mr. VP?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was an IT department, and I remember it because it was on I think it was the third or the fourth floor. And actually, do you know what? I remember being in year 7, this is 97, and I was on a computer, and I had to ask one of the students next to me, I'm looking to go on a website in the UK. Can I go on that website from Hong Kong? And I look back and think how simple times were back then, asking such simple questions, being so computer illiterate back then. But how times have changed.
Well, Mr. VP sadly passed a few years back, but was a bit of a legend, I think, in school. I think his room used to be called the Empire or something like that, and it was this darkened shrine that you'd go into where, you needed some kind of a PhD in computer science, just to understand what was going on in there. Sadly missed.
Next up is Rayo Naraman from the class of 1991. Rayo is a graduate of Canterbury University, where he earned a Master's of Engineering Management and is currently a managing partner at Serendipity Ventures in Malaysia. Rayo is very heavily involved in entrepreneurship, tech startups, and investment in said tech or startups, as well as innovation and digital businesses. Hearing that Rayo planned to appear on the show, the wily Mr. Stevens has already reached out to Rayo and plans to have him speak to his students later this academic year. Rayo, welcome to the show, and I have to say that Mr. Williamson tells me you have an incredibly strong alumni network from your year group, and with more than 60 or even 100 of you connected. Plus, I'm sure our listeners would love to know what the school was back in 1991. It must seem very different to you now.
Hey, Chloe and Ian, thank you very much for the opportunity to take part. I really do want to start all my sentences with you guys with back in my day, given I seem to be one of the oldest ones here. Looking at Chloe, Ryan, even Janice, and, Harpal, I'm kind of feeling very, very old. It's great to be involved with South Island. I went through the full 7 years, and it had a very, very marked impression on my life, going through there and being in Hong Kong. Early last year, I think it was March, April, at the height of global lockdowns, a couple of my classmates reached out, hey, let's have a Zoom call. We're all locked up at home. One of them even went so far as creating a little little Excel spreadsheet for international time calculations, because it was New Zealand all the way through to both sides of the US and the UK and in between. It was awesome, to be able to see them. Some of us had lost more hair than others. Some looked exactly the same. And not long after that, we created a little WhatsApp group. There was 15 of us, then there was 30. Now there's about 60 of us when I last checked a couple of days ago. Sometimes no messages. Sometimes you wake up in the morning, being based in Malaysia, in the same time zone as Hong Kong, you wake up and there'll be 150 to 350 messages, with 15 different stories in between. And core to all of that is really the joy that we had at South Island School. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you guys and to reminisce. And also to look at the pictures and think how unfair. We never had a fraction of what you young ones had back in our day. So thank you very much. And in terms of Mr. Stevens, I'm really looking forward to having a chat with him and his students to kind of bring in some of the real world context, because I've spent most of my time, made the mistakes and lost the hair in the space of innovation, creating new businesses, both my own and for other people, and helping a lot of others build their own.
I think that Mr. Stevens and his students will very much enjoy having you speak to them, Rayo, so that's a great connection to set up.
Not forgetting our student guests too, Ryan Mack only joined the DLC back in August as our Steppy House rep. However, ever since then, he has made such a huge contribution to our council that he very deservedly landed one of our 2 DLC marketing coordinator roles for 2021 and is now part of our head team. So congratulations to you, Ryan. He was part of our season 2 tech review team and has shown that he has some very strong views regarding data privacy. So it sounds like he is ideal for the show today. Welcome to the Tech Bubble, Ryan.
Hi Chloe, it's a pleasure to be on the show and also a pleasure to be on the DLC head team, and I look forward to being on more Tech Bubble podcasts and talking more on various issues about tech, especially the more controversial ones like data privacy today.
Thanks, Ryan. I think there'll be plenty of that in store today. Okay, so let's get started. So, data privacy. Well, where do we start with this incredibly emotive topic? Quite possibly our most challenging area of focus yet, and with the ubiquitous nature of technology itself, a growing concern across all walks of life. Janice, if I can start with you by revisiting the point made at the start of the show. Do you feel there are certain applications that, as a school, you'd advise South Island to stay away from? And I guess the obvious question is, and if so, why?
It's a big question. I think that, the immediate response I have is no. But I think the more nuanced response is it depends. And that's, very standard, a legal response to any question. But I think the things we need to think about is what are we using the application for? How are we using the application? And why do we need to use the application? And generally, if you're able to answer these 3 things, then at least you have a case for why you should be using certain applications in the first place. And there are basic guidelines that help. For example, if you're looking at specific social media websites, for example, you probably don't want users under the age of 13 on there, even if they may be accessible to them. I still remember back in the day in South Island when there were websites because of certain words in the URL or on the page that were censored, so we weren't even allowed to access those. I don't know if that still exists. I think maybe to some degree, but there are limitations that are already in place to make sure the internet is a safe space for everyone. And I would say generally that it's very difficult to just blanket ban something, and it's always going to be about a balance and a risk assessment between the use and the usefulness against what potential harms there might be as a result of use, whether that is specifically about the data itself or about the communities and the classroom as a whole. And one of the difficult things when we talk about privacy and data protection and internet safety is that it's not possible. Even though we tick the little box, everyone ticks the little box, it's not possible to ask everyone to read the terms and conditions in their entirety because they are very long. They are legal documents that, although is supposed to help clarify and help make more transparent what certain applications do, really it's also there to protect the company from any liability when they're talking about use. And as I'm sure some of you may know, the terms and conditions are very long. They're somewhere as long as a short piece of fiction, a short classical work. So, I think part of making sure when we're talking about which applications to use, it's not only about what they are, but how you can set more privacy-friendly settings within them. And so it's a very big question, and it's very much about again balance between between the use and the risks involved with those applications.
It's interesting, a couple of years ago, I think I may have said this in a previous episode, but it's worth perhaps stating again, given that it's going to be Internet Safety Week. We had, there was one of the famous law firms had broken down Instagram's terms and conditions into easy speak. They put it as a series of bullet points, and we still use the resource with our Internet Safety Week now, I think in either years 10 or 11, and the students are always amazed at what they're signing away, essentially. It's incredible, but of course the terms and conditions don't really make much sense to them, and therefore they sign it away without really thinking too much about it.
Yeah, by this same spiel, I watched a social experiment from Germany, and I think it was where the cashier or someone in a store actually read out one line of the terms and conditions to customers. So it's like, would you be comfortable if I took in your address? Can I have your mom's phone number at the counter? So it's very jarring because people don't notice that when, as Janice rightfully mentioned, it's in a block of text that likens to, the length of Macbeth. So it's ludicrous to expect users to really engage with this piece of text. But Janice, as you mentioned, terms and conditions, you talk about how they're long, full of jargon, users don't read them. So it's almost like consent here is illusory, right? It's almost like there is consent, users tick that little box, but there isn't any informed consent. When you update your phone, there is a privacy policy page. You can agree to it, you can download it, you can email it, but you cannot not agree to it. So what role do you think individual consent plays in our digital landscape? And with your legal background, how do you think we can change our legislation to fit that role?
Consent. It's very complicated, and consent is part of my research in figuring out ways in which we can make consent more informed. Because for example, under the General Data Protection Regulation, the European Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, consent has been made as part of a way in which companies or groups could, or industries could have our data. And so it's not the only way. I think maybe that's worth pointing out. There are ways in which companies, organizations, or governments could gather and collect and analyze and process your data without necessarily asking for consent. For example, with governments and with police and with law enforcement, they're not gonna necessarily ask you if they could collect your data or if they could enter your house. They could have a warrant through their other legal mechanisms to prevent certain things, but you can very easily see how you can kind of metaphorically think about this in the context of data, and particularly health perhaps is a better example when we're thinking about the pandemic nowadays and how data could be used for a public good. And so the public interest is also a legitimate interest and a legitimate reason in which organizations can gather our data. But when we think about consent, there are other factors that may nudge, for example, certain users to give away or consent more easily. And these are some things that may not be kind of regulated as much or looked into. And what I'm talking more about here is dark patterns specifically. And so when you think about a terms and conditions page or a service that you want to join, very often you'll see the agree button as either the bigger button, a button that's in a nicer color, a font that's clearer, and you'll see maybe just a tiny X in the corner, or you'll see a answer this later or skip this part. And so consent is very complicated, and the final part that I would just add is that sometimes if you don't read the terms and conditions, you don't know what's going on, and this isn't the fault of the individual. I think that's important to add. There are entire industries and entire teams of people trying to get you to click agree. So consent's quite a loaded word, and we've seen how perhaps consent isn't the best way forward when we're thinking about data protection and privacy, which is why we have some of kind of more broader rights and laws in place to protect data in ways in which people may not think their data could be used.
Janice, I'd just like to add that right now with Apple is introducing a new regulation which requires everyone to consent explicitly to certain companies such as Facebook and other social media companies to collecting their data. So if like they won't be allowed to track you in the background, especially across apps anymore if you're using Apple devices. So what are your thoughts on this new rule implemented by Apple?
I think one thing to keep in mind is that when we think about informed consent, one thing that very often goes hand in hand is whether consent is meaningful. And then that's a word we also use quite often when we're thinking about, in the case of Apple or in the case of using services in social media like Facebook, are there actually alternatives for individuals, for consumers, for users to use instead? And if there aren't, then very often, even if people don't necessarily agree with the data policies related to those companies, they'll still have to give away their data anyways. And so when we think about consent, another element of that is whether or not that's meaningful, and what that actually means in practice.
I would say that will probably make a lot more people aware that these companies are trying to collect our data, because right now they just do it in the background. Not many people might explicitly know that they are collecting our data, but if Apple like pops up a notification saying, would you like to consent to Facebook collecting the data, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would say no to that. So I guess there is an improvement.
Yeah, and I think maybe just a short comment on that. I would say that as we've seen from the Facebook scenario a couple of weeks or maybe months ago, depending on when you're tuning into the tech bubble, is that it has kind of raised the questions into people's heads. But at the same time, humans are very often creatures of habit. We like convenience, particularly when we're already hooked on to and are frequent users of certain applications. And so even with more privacy kind of aware students and staff, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, on the committee for DLC, people still opt for using WhatsApp, for example, and I'm not saying one is necessarily better than the other, but we are humans at the end of the day, and sometimes it's just things are just more convenient.
I think what's interesting about the privacy policies, or as Ryan mentioned, the Apple pop-ups is, yes, they do give you some degree of information about what you're putting your data into, but it's almost like in today's tech or digital landscape, when you're consenting something, it's like shifting the liability from the data processor to you. So there's been a lot of talk about, should we shift the focus on data privacy more in terms of the stewardship of data rather than looking at it in terms of consent. So, if you use my data and something goes wrong, you should be liable, and you cannot delegate your liability to me through a privacy notice. So what are your thoughts on kind of shifting the focus of where or how we look at data privacy, Janice?
So it's quite interesting that you mentioned stewardship, because the organization where I'm doing my fellowship with, ODI, work quite a lot in this area of stewardship and thinking about not only other legal ways, so thinking about perhaps data or having data trusts. So in trustees, in a more legal term of having a steward, having a custodian of data, where you don't necessarily have to make those decisions yourself. And also in my own research, I tried to think about creating, as mentioned, more commons type framework, which kind of acts as a resource hub, which helps inform people in a way that's consolidated, but also encourages them to actually collaborate and create in the process. I think the solution is ultimately interdisciplinary in that, we need the legal side of things for protection. You need tech to get involved because ultimately we are talking about data. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that companies and institutions and governments actually have ethical codes or guidance to support that.
Interesting that you mentioned commons. I actually was one of Mr. Stevens' students as well, and we learned about the tragedy of commons as an economic theory. So I love how you mentioned the interdisciplinary aspect of that. And as I mentioned, Rayo, I'm aware that, in discussing data privacy concerns, this is a very large, multifaceted term, and we really just scraped the surface of that in our first 10 minutes. And it means a lot of things depending on context. So Rayo, what does it mean in your line of work, and what if, do you have any concerns about that?
One of the things that I'm really looking forward to in terms of this session is actually listening to the experts, both Harpal in terms of the technical commercial elements and Janice in terms of the legal. My perspective is, I guess, the two sides of the coin. I look at this as an individual user and an old individual user. In other words, I have an appreciation of what data means to me versus what data might mean to someone 30 years younger than me. And I also look at it from a perspective of, I guess, the tech space where I play. If you really want to understand data, you've got to take a kind of a satellite level picture, right? So if you look at your mobile phone, right, it has over 100,000 times the processing power of the computer that put man on the moon 50 years ago, right? Now, I do a lot of entrepreneurship programs for university students, and I make them physically take their phone out, hold it in their hands, and try and get their heads around that. And these 20-something-year-olds look at me, they just can't fathom it, right? And I ask them, what do you use it for? Well, song was perfect. Let me take a selfie, right? It's crazy. This massive power sitting in your hands, and it's used predominantly for selfies. All right. So if you understand where privacy fits, if you looked at it 20, 25 years ago, it was making sure that my bank statements, which are 3 or 4 years old, were destroyed before they get put into the trash. Right, so there's no potential risk of someone picking up my name, my details, and then going through the whole challenge of identity fraud, right? Whereas now it's such a different shift because we can't wait to put our data out there. So if you're looking at how all of these things come together, phones are going to get faster, access to the internet is going to be considerably faster. Not only that, the level and the quality of information out there is going to grow exponentially. One of the quotes I'd come across when I was running an MBA type program many years ago, this is over 10 years ago, was I think in about 15 to 20 years from now, the amount of knowledge and information that's available is going to double every 2 to 3 months. Just take a second. I can't remember the specifics of the numbers there, but think about what that actually means, right? So all of these things come together when we talk about information, and access to information and ownership of information. Because fundamentally, most B2C digital businesses have a very simple business model. We give you our service for free. We give you our product for free. Well, if it's for free, who's paying for it? There's a lovely phrase, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Right? And a lot of people don't appreciate that, but that's fundamental to what this is. So when I look at the likes of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, from a tech investment perspective, I think it's awesome because they've been able to monetize what people do not genuinely value, which is their own information. And that sounds like a really broad and arrogant statement to make, but you just need to look at how much information people are putting online. Who they are, who they like, who they don't like, when they don't like them, where they are, where they check in, where they check out. It's phenomenal, right? So data mining is kind of the new future here, right? Getting the value of that data. Again, another phrase you'd often hear in this space, data is the new oil, all right? So to me, privacy is kind of at the tail end, and I don't mean that it's not important. I mean simply the business models that these companies have to adopt will drive how they view their customers and how they believe their customers view ownership of their data. Listening to you guys now, I think it's an awesome conversation to have, but I wonder how many of these sorts of conversations take place out in the real world. And you don't have to wonder. You know what the answer is. Right? So whatever people start thinking about data now has to be really, really clear that this is just the start of the ongoing conversation. So that's how I view it from a commercial perspective. It is value, and that value is tremendous. It can be used to change the world, but again, like access to anything, it can be used for nefarious purposes as well. Chloe. So that's kind of the business kind of professional perspective. From a personal perspective, it was awesome listening to Janice, this concept of consent. How many of us have actually booked an airline ticket and they say, check the box, do you accept the terms and conditions? No, I don't. Well, then don't fly with me, right? You know, do you want to bank with me? I'd love to sign this. Yeah, but I disagree with these terms. I'll go to the bank next door. You know, it's really simple. Companies have general counsel and legal to protect themselves, right? That's one of their risks. So for me, I find this fascinating. You know, personally, I genuinely don't know where I sit. I bounce on both extremes. WhatsApp, you know, I acknowledge what's been going on, but it seems that they've already been sharing data. You know, the legislation, the new terms and conditions, according to what I've read for WhatsApp, for example, are coming out to reflect what they're already doing, right? And if they're already doing this, what's changed, right? So the other element is age. You know, you see, I'm part of a Rotary group, and we're all older than I am, you know, kind of gentlemen and women in their late 50s, mid 60s, and the whole WhatsApp situation has really concerned them. You know, and I've had to share my view, which is, look, here's a couple of articles, you know, here's the reality, here's what WhatsApp is looking to do. At the end of the day, if you want this free service, you have to give something up. And what you're giving up is, my take on WhatsApp is really access to you. Right? And you know, no one is talking about reading your texts and that sort of thing. It's literally about them monetizing the metadata that they're collecting to sell access to you. It's not even selling you anymore, right? And then you have the 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds who live on TikTok. You know, young kids are coming out on TikTok, which is awesome, you know, to see that level of confidence, right? Sharing their stories on TikTok and in their school uniforms on TikTok. And I'm thinking, hey, wow, you know, to be clear, I'm way too uncool and way too old to have TikTok, but I see enough of this out there, right? So I don't have any hard and fast rules. You know, my wife and I are very clear as to how we protect our data. You know, Malaysia, for example, for the simplest of things, people say, look, can you you get a freebie at a mall. Can you fill out a form with your details? They want you for a database. You know, so the number of times Jason Bourne and James Bond have signed up in Malaysia for free goods, every time I sign something out, I'm not giving them my name, my ID number. Why the hell would I, why would I do that? Right? You know, so the number of James Bonds and Jason Bournes that have signed up for this sort of information, or you know, Mind Your English, the old TV program, you know, Mr. Patel, right, has signed up for something. So for me, this is something I'm aware of. I look at it from a personal perspective. You know, I've got a 9-year-old, and I think how she accesses information and what she's going to access. And I think about it from my perspective, which is it's my data. So I have to be careful with it, because my concern is actually the real issues, the banks being hacked. And you don't hear much about these stories because they basically keep it quiet. You know, if you look at the number, I've got a lot of friends in banking, and the number of banks that are hacked and data's put out there, you know, the number of financial service firms that get hammered. Singapore, for example, it's been a while since I've been in Hong Kong. You go into any one of the kind of Class A buildings, you know, for meetings, which have banks and all the big brands. You cannot get in unless you give them your ID or your passport. Who's securing those details? And I've asked them point blank, where's this data stored? How's it secured? And the response is basically no response. You want to get in this building to meet your client, give me your IC, you know, your ID. So be it, right? So for me, this is, you know, I bounce between the two. The more free data out there, the more tech startups can grow, and the more millionaires and billionaires can be created to take over the world. But the flip side is, you know, how much are we giving? How much are we losing? So I'm not sure if I've answered your specific question, but what I will say, finish off with, is what is happening now globally is really just the start. You know, I think Ryan mentioned Apple, Tim Cook's recent speech, his video about the changes they're making. You know, I wonder how many people realize that it was really Apple that came up with the first ability to track, you know, the software to actually track users' journeys to drive increasing utilization of apps, which built the App Store business model, right? So business models will drive engagement based on how users and customers feel they're being utilized or abused. Companies will then react. I've yet to see any of the big boys and girls actually come at this in a very forward-thinking manner. It's always been reaction, action, reaction, action, reaction. Outrage, reaction, action, and then again something happens. Not too far downstream. So my perspective, I guess, Chloe, is sort of fits between the other panel members, and that is I'm looking at it from a commercial business perspective and from the user's perspective. The information's out there; it's just going to increase.
I was just gonna say that like the stuff on like metadata and stuff I heard a lot of people say that it's like anonymous, so we shouldn't be afraid of them collecting it because it's just your location and the time and stuff. But I recently saw an article on the New York Times which talked about how someone leaked a copy of the phone metadata to the newspaper a few years back. And then they were able to track down a number of really surprising people just using the phone metadata, so where they had connected to and when. They were able to track down Donald Trump going on a lunch with the Japanese Prime Minister at the time somewhere in Florida. They were able to track down Pentagon officials working at top secret military facilities. They were able to track down the name and addresses of every single person who worked at the CIA and all that. So I'd just like to say that the metadata is actually quite a big problem, as it's really, really easy to link up your locations where you visit to your name. So for example, they could see that you visit this apartment really often, and it wouldn't take much work just to check publicly available records to see who owns the house and find out who lives there and so on. So the metadata is actually not really that anonymous at all. So I would say that the metadata is actually a really big problem.
It's tracking everything you do. I have a lot of friends in the telco business, and so when I bought my new phone, I'm in the tech space, and I had an iPhone 4 up until 3 years ago, and which I had with great pride, and it stopped working. I realized I had to finally upgrade, so I got a new Samsung, and it had, for example, Facebook preloaded in it. And last time I used Facebook was about 5 years ago. I've got an account I hop on every now and then. I couldn't actually delete the app from my phone. I had to go through every single step to shut down its access. And I was talking to a friend of mine in the telco space. They can actually, if you have an app, track your metadata even when you've logged out, because they tie into some elements of your core OS, I guess. So every single phone in the world has a ID, right? So you're not, and if you're, for example, in places like Malaysia, Singapore, if I buy a SIM card, even if it's a prepaid disposable SIM card, they need to see my passport or my ID, right? So they know where I'm at, so a lot of this data is out there, and it's being utilized. The defense sector, I'm sure, uses this a lot, and you see a lot of this out there. But when you get into the private sector, then it gets really interesting.
Yeah, I think the important thing when we're thinking and talking about metadata is that metadata is data about data, right? And so even though the metadata is not directly associated to us as individuals, as Rayo said, there are a lot of very specific identifiers, which is what makes it a little more risky, or what makes metadata risky business, is because, as with many applications, and we're thinking about, big data in particular, the way in which we can actually build profiles is through the aggregation of all of this data into the same place, or even across several databases. But because of the kind of immense power that a lot of companies have with a lot of servers, with a lot of storage in the cloud, etc., that it makes it very easy and very quick, and also no longer very expensive for companies and for applications to actually create these profiles, or have a good idea at least of what you may like, where you've been, what you're interested in. And so add it all together, across not only one company but many companies, you can kind of see how you do have a digital self that is created through either assumptions made from you, but also based on some of your activity as well.
I was just about to say there, this is an amazing resource, I think. I mean, does Mr. Stevens need you to come and speak now, Rayo? Given all of the points that are being made about business and economics, etc., this would pretty much teach one of the papers, I would imagine. What do you think, Chloe? You're doing economics at the moment. Is this useful material for your class?
Oh yeah, for sure. Mr. Stevens would be delighted.
Excellent, there we go. I think I deserve a pay rise. I think that's what I'm basically saying here, that I'm getting all of these extra resources in for the school. So, moving on from that, thinking about the kind of business connections, the economics, and some of the points that have been made already by Rayo and also by Janice. Harpal, I wanted to bring you in on this and get your take on this. I'm going to repeat the same question that was asked earlier on, which is the fact that the context of data privacy for all of us. In my work, it's about child protection. From your perspective over there in the UK with the work that you do, what sort of context surrounds data privacy for you?
So actually, one of the interesting stats that I picked up off Rayo, actually, and just to build on that, in 2020, we actually created more data than the entirety of history combined. And data is only growing. It's only proliferating. I remember when I first started my job, I was, one user behind one PC. Your average user now's got a laptop, an iPad, an iWatch, an iPhone, multiple iPhones, etc. The thing with data, especially with lockdown, is organizations are struggling to control where data is coming from, where data is stored, who's got access to it, who shouldn't have access to it. And data privacy, data protection, it's gained significant exposure and traction in the last 5-6 years. When I joined my business and started doing my role, getting organizations to evaluate and look at something like a cloud-based backup service, people were still, we're going back not far, 2013, people were still tentative. Well, I don't want my data in the cloud. I don't know where it is, for example. And do you know what the interesting thing is? A lot of organizations still protect their data to the equivalent of a VHS cassette. It's called tapes, basically. There's still, I read a statistic, Symantec, Veritas, they're the ones that basically created the backup exec technology to protect data on tapes. They make $500 million a year.
Wow.
Of renewals, just renewals, because your traditional oil and gas companies, your traditional banks, that's still how they go about protecting data. In the UK, look, we've seen, laws, regulations. We've seen the Data Protection Act, which controls how personal information is used by organizations. We've seen GDPR, and from my point of view, GDPR, I was thinking, right, okay, we've got something we can go in there and actually start, something we can use and back our case, right, Mr. IT manager, you have to make sure your data is protected, so to say. But what we're finding is it's not changing as many attitudes as it's increasing the fines, but there's still a lot of gaps out there. We're finding, this is an interesting saying, is data is definitely being seen as the new oil, so to say. I remember a meeting I went to going 3-4 years ago. This is an organization that they're a single site business. They actually create sonar equipment. So we went into the meeting and on the back of the meeting was a massive map of the UK, and it showed every dot around the UK was a boat, basically. And their main driver, they were dealing with a lot of MOD data as well. And their main driver for making sure that their data was protected was the insurance company would value them based on the data. If anything happened to their business, the actual insurance company would say, right, I want to see your data. If something happened to their site and they didn't have an off-site copy of that data, that organization would be valued at zero, for example. This is forcing organizations to invest significantly to make sure that that their data is protected. It's investing, in understanding that, look, what are the threats out there? How can they protect themselves from these threats? And interestingly enough, how can they ensure that the recovery in the event of downtime is seamless, so to say? And one statistic I always like to use is goodwill only lasts for 24 hours. And I always go back to the phone analogy. I use Vodafone. If Vodafone's down for 24 hours, I'm going to start looking at Orange, T-Mobile, Virgin, for example. And that's, loyalty at its best, so to say. It's 24 hours is all it guarantees you before, your customers start looking elsewhere. I had a statistic, on average, 1 in 3 businesses go under within 12 months after a data loss experience. And actually what I'm finding is, it's not so much what are you going to, whether it's going to happen to you. It's more around, look, what are you going to do when that happens to your business? And IT managers, actually, I do feel sorry for them in one respect, because the entire success of the business is on their shoulders in many ways, because they're seen as, the protectors of that business's data. They need to be able to prove that the data within that business is protected, that they can recover that data, and if they're unable to, look, this is your job on the line, so to say. Actually, what we're finding more, as well as especially lockdown has accelerated this, is organizations are moving away from the old school traditional, right, okay, I'm going to have my hardware, my servers, my infrastructure on-prem. They're moving a lot more to cloud-based platforms like the Office 365s, the G Suite. A lot of people are working from home now. And your average user is pushing stuff on OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams. I was actually one of the 80 million new Teams users last April. And that, that's just amazing statistics that, one situation alone forced Microsoft to inherit 80 million new users on a single platform. The interesting flip side to that, and going around that whole data protection, data privacy, is in Microsoft's T's and C's, they actually stipulate our responsibility is the uptime of the platform. The data, Mr. User, Mr. Customer, it's your responsibility.
Yeah.
And this completely changes the mindset, because the mindset has always been, very traditional. No one gets shot by Microsoft. Microsoft, it's the industry leader. Look, I can put all my eggs in that one basket. You can't, MD can't come to IT manager and say, why are you putting everything with Microsoft? But actually, now what we're finding is, look, you need to make sure you don't put all your eggs in one basket. You need to make sure that data is protected. I was speaking to a school going back 6-8 months ago. They were one of 3 schools or 3 organizations globally that had all their data on Microsoft Streams deleted. Now, I asked the question, look, I'm not so familiar, what is Microsoft Streams? And he actually explained that's the platform they put all their teaching videos. So it's the equivalent of YouTube. Mm-hmm. And we lost best part of nearly 100 hours of teaching material there. And it'd say, look, to Microsoft's credit, they tried, getting someone on the phone was difficult, because unless you're spending 10 million a month with Microsoft, you're very much left to, the FAQ, so to say.
Yeah.
He struggled with getting the data back, but in the end, they weren't able to, and then it went down the legal route, and that's when he actually explained to me, we signed the, T's and C's, and actually on the T's and C, it does stipulate, we suggest you protect the data with a third party, so to say. And actually, Microsoft's own admission, 80% of organizations that using Office 365 don't protect outside of Office 365. So that's definitely, our fastest growing area right now is, when we're having conversations, do you protect Microsoft outside Office 365? And interestingly enough, in the UK, the government's the public schools are being encouraged to use the G Suite platform. Google's going to market as a free tool, and it's an interesting concept, because they're trying to think, right, if we can get students in nice and early, getting comfortable with the G Suite platform, by the time they become, the MDs of the world, they're just going to be used to Google, so they'll want to invest in the Google platform.
If I can maybe just respond there for a second, because South Island School has made extensive use of G Suite for several years now, and to the extent that the way that students work has transformed, even in the last 5 to 10 years. So, which is then in turn, as students have adopted and actually adapted, their working habits to the way in which G Suite operates, that in turn has kind of forced change on the teachers. So if you go back even 5 years ago, most of the teachers at South Island School would have been using Microsoft Word extensively. But increasingly, of course, students were essentially deciding that they didn't want the Microsoft programs, therefore cutting that expense out, going straight to Google Docs, which meant that the way in which students operate now is entirely collaborative. There's an expectation, actually, when I'm working with my younger classes, that I am, I've been trying to teach them how to take notes at the beginning of the school year, which was a completely alien concept to them. Because what their idea was that notes take place on a Google slideshow, and that you'll be filling in your bit of the Google slideshow of a presentation with sort of maybe 20 slides on. There's some benefits, of course, to that in terms of collaborative of work, but there's also a trust in terms of big tech here. I've made a note of the fact that both Rayo and you as well now, Harpal, have used this term, the new oil. It almost sounds insidious, doesn't it? That there's an insidious threat in terms of what data presents to us. And I'd also like to comment on the fact that there is a sort of lag, isn't there, with technology, where people get excited about new tech tools, and then 4 or 5 years later they start to get a sense of what it really means. The same thing happened, I remember, back in 2006-07 when there were some huge changes going on there with what we probably call now Web 2.0, and then the advent of the Internet of Things, which just seemed like if you're not keeping up with this material, then you are lagging behind. This is the future. But actually now, 3 or 4 years later, you're talking about, of course, cloud-based computing, which we all kind of leapt to. And then there's a sort of, a pause and, was that so wise?
On your point, Mr. Williamson, the fact that we've shifted into G Suite shows, number one, our dependence, but also shows how volatile these systems can be. So I think over Christmas, G Suite actually crashed for a few hours. I'm not sure if any of you were online. I was online. I couldn't access G Suite. And that was like a moment of reckoning, saying how much we are dependent on G Suite, and when these systems crash, when these existing systems are no longer there for us to depend on, what does that mean for our data? What does that mean for the systems that we've been so accustomed to? That might mean not being able to edit documents, not being able to collaborate. So a lot of pedagogy has been built around big tech. And that kind of questions the ethics of it. What does it mean to build your education around a company that is profiting off of it? So there's a lot of thought here. And I think Mr. Williamson mentioned kind of putting the trust in big tech, and that almost nothing new is revolutionary in terms of technology. So Janice here, I'm just reading what she said in the chat. It said Microsoft Teams is essentially piecing together existing Microsoft tech. And I think, a lot of tools we see are just amalgamations of different elements of existing programs put into one. And then it allows us to not have to deviate from that platform, it becomes an all-in-one, such that we become reliant on it and we can, almost never deviate from that point.
Yeah, so with Microsoft Teams, we can see that essentially it's kind of the user interface, the user experience is such that it's much easier for us to use Microsoft technologies within one application. But I think when we're talking about big tech, not only big tech, but maybe technology more generally, is that when we're thinking about the pandemic and how quickly, in the context of schools and online learning, have had to adapt and move everything to the digital environment, what we're seeing is that even with Microsoft Teams and with Zoom in particular, these two applications kind of skyrocketed in its use and its popularity. But the core purpose of these two applications were not for learning, were not for education. And so, what does that mean for the data? What does that mean in context of thinking about the business models of these companies? What is, because their aim, their ultimate goal is not to provide education. And so, there are tensions that I think people are starting to realize and unpack a little bit more when discussing, and maybe this goes back to the question that was asked at the beginning of the podcast, is should we ban any applications? And thinking about the what it's for, the hows and the whys related to that.
For me, I back up most of my photos, files, etc. using iCloud. And the other day, I was just having a conversation with someone, like some of my friends and relatives, and they're like, aren't you afraid of like letting Apple, like if Apple had like a server failure or something, all your data would like be gone because like it's not physical. And then, or they ask, are you afraid about being hacked or something? And I'm like, I never really like thought about that type of stuff because I just thought, oh, it's gonna be quite secure. Apple's a big company anyway and stuff. But for me personally, I prefer to use it because it's quite convenient. But maybe like we do have to like weigh the benefits and drawbacks about whether or not it is like really good to like rely on these cloud services for our data, or is it like better to have physical copies, or both. It might be good to like both back them up digitally and onto a physical hard drive. So like the question is, do we really want to trust like big tech companies with our data?
In our recent mailbag here at the DLC, we received an interesting email from one of our Year 12 students. That's Toby Mack from 12C1. So thanks, Toby, for your questions and points. And he discussed his concerns about educational facilities. I stress this is not South Island specific, this is generally about education as a whole, being used for the purposes of surveillance capitalism. So I presume this is maybe a reference to Shoshana Zuboff's book of the same title, or what I would perhaps refer to as, once we'd have called maybe 5 years ago, the Internet of Things, and the range of tracking data which we enable via a number of applications. So I myself, for instance, I know I'm kind of guilty of using Strava to clock my trail runs, and I'm aware of some of the ethical concerns associated with the applications of this nature. Ryan, earlier on, Naraman mentioned his concerns for teens sharing way too much personal content. I was talking about TikTok, etc. And yet this seems to be in stark contrast rather to these kind of quite sophisticated concerns that we've outlined above. So, as a representative of the DLC, and indeed for Year 12 as a whole, how much concern do you feel there is in your year group for this issue as a whole?
Personally, I don't use Strava to track like my exercise, but I do use my Apple Watch, so maybe that's quite similar. So I personally feel like there isn't that much concern in like much of the school really about the issue of data tracking, because like I feel like most people have just become resigned to the fact that, oh, these big data companies are going to track us and we're going to use them anyway. Like there's not much we can do about that. We have no other option anyway, so like we can't do anything about it, so who cares? So people just like put like pictures of themselves on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, and review quite a lot about themselves online. So I would say that there really is a lack of awareness on like data tracking. Like for example, most people still aren't like convinced that we should probably move away from WhatsApp due to privacy issues or the such concerns. Like people are just like, oh, WhatsApp's easier, who cares, like it's all the same, and they've been doing it for years anyway. So a lot of people, I feel like, have just like accepted the fact that big tech is going to track us. So I feel like there really is a lack of concern, and I feel like it's definitely necessary for us here and in general to raise more awareness about the issue of data tracking. And if you're listening to this podcast, I feel like one thing that you should do is to make sure you be careful on what you post online and make sure that it can't be used in the future against you. As even if it's deleted, it's really still staying in a database somewhere, not really deleted, just hidden.
It's interesting for me to know. I mean, we do a poll every year actually with the Year 10 media students where they try to find out social media use in the school. You mentioned Facebook and Twitter and things like that there. I mean, Twitter, for instance, really you need to be 17, or at least that's the idea, to use it. And Facebook, I thought, was pretty unpopular amongst the older students in school who might be using, for instance, Instagram or other social media instead. I mean, how popular do you think those kind of social media forms are in the senior section, for instance, amongst your peer group?
No, I'd definitely say Facebook is probably less common because most people have Facebook maybe just to like look at stuff or they don't really use it. But I say Instagram definitely is quite popular. I'm not sure about this, but I do feel like a lot of people use TikTok and Snapchat as well. So like the younger type of social media might be more popular. And with regard to Twitter, I feel like a lot of people do have an account, but maybe they don't like use it that much. They just use it to like look at various stuff online and stuff. So for example, I have Twitter too, but my Twitter is really just looking at news and other quite boring things online. So I feel like mostly it's Instagram and Snapchat and that type of social media.
Worst case scenario, okay? So a question for all of you to consider. Anyone can jump in here. How many of you have had a major sort of data privacy breach of some kind? I mean, has there been a privacy issue for you that's had some kind of impact on your work at any given time?
I'd say I've been pretty lucky so far, and I haven't had any issues. But I mean, there's definitely been times in which like some services went down, and it did like scare me for a few minutes. Like for example, I saw that some time ago, Twitter had quite a big breach, and they did notify everyone who was breached. And luckily, I wasn't in that group. So, but I mean, at that point, I did feel like quite worried. But on the other hand, there was not much I could have done about that. So
yeah, I think when it comes, so for example, kind of following on from the Twitter notification side of things. So the reason why companies have to notify people, even though their data may not have been breached, is because it's a legal requirement to do so, or at least under the GDPR in the EU. So there is some benefit to having these laws and regulations in place. And I think one tip I would say is that you can check to see if your password has been leaked into a database online. The website is called Have I Been Pwned? So it's spelled PWNED. I believe. So you can kind of chuck in your username or a password, and it kind of collates any publicly available database, and it's done in quite a secure way. And Troy Hunt, the man behind the website, is also really interesting. So I would suggest kind of digging into kind of his background. And he also had a couple of tensions as well in deciding whether or not to sell it off, because the site was expanding. A lot of people were using the product. But he had privacy concerns because he didn't want to sell it off to a company who might actually use the resource to cause more harm. So there's certain requirements there. And when I personally have not been, I have had password leaks when I checked on the websites, but I've not had anything major. But I just wanted to share an experience from my research that may kind of raise a little bit more awareness of the type of data that could be out there. Is that when I was conducting a study, I was actually exercising my data subject rights under the GDPR, under the data protection regulation. And so one of those rights is that you have a right to access all of the data that companies have about you. And so I exercised this right to a large British supermarket. And when you make a phone call to, I don't know, a supermarket or an airline, very often they'll say, this call may be monitored or recorded for quality control purposes. You get that message, but of course you stay on the line. I don't know anyone who's actually kind of stopped the call because they had concerns about that, because you're calling for a reason, you want a problem solved, or you have an issue, or you have a question. And so when I got my data back from this large supermarket, I actually got a recording of a call that I had made with them at that time, and it wasn't a shock to the system, but it was quite surprising, but also understandable that they have kept this data. And so this isn't a breach, because I was told explicitly during the call, and I'm sure it's listed on their website, that this is something that happens, and that you consent to it when you call, or that it's a legitimate purpose that they have to record the call. But it makes you think about the extent to which you feel like there has been a breach of privacy, or that your personal data has been used for purposes that you didn't think beforehand.
Quick question. In your research, so I know there are like reservoirs of research data from previous research sources, and obviously they're all anonymized, and all of the research subjects have given their consent at some point in time. But let's say you're looking 20 years into the future, and you're looking at that research data set, and you're saying, okay, these users consented for their data to be used within this specific experiment or this specific study, and then you're using it for your specific purpose now. So, does the idea of consent come back in? What are your considerations surrounding maybe less digital data, but more research data, and really building a profile for research?
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting, and maybe the specific kind of use case that I'll use goes back to health, particularly when you're using words like consent that are, they have definitions, but can mean different things in different contexts. So, for example, when you are a volunteer for a trial for a new vaccine, you consent to being part of the study, but then you also have to separately consent to that data from the study being used for another purpose. So again, there's no other word at the moment, and or there's no other concept that helps us separate these two elements of consent. So it's very difficult, if you ask an individual, oh, do you consent to this? They may say yes, thinking that it's one or the other, or or vice versa, or both. And so when we're thinking about particularly data reuse, one of the things that is maybe not as protected yet is anonymous data, because anonymous data, you can say, is not personal data, but that doesn't mean that when you aggregate it all together, when you're looking at group data, when you're looking at data from groups, for example, if you're taking a selfie with different people, it's not just your own data, but it also has an impact on other people's data as well, depending on how you use it. And so it's still a challenge, and if there was a solution, I'm sure it would already be out there in the world. But it's consent is one of those tricky ones.
I entirely agree with you there. We have just enough time today for one more question. Given that it's Internet Safety Week, what tips would you have in 1 minute or less for our school community when it comes to the issue of privacy? Harpal.
I would say it's important to stay safe online, so to say. Be aware of what you're doing, where you're sharing your data online. But from a flip side point of view, and from more of a career aspirations point of view, I would say data, IT is definitely a great industry to be in. And as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't, when I was in school, and I think subconsciously why I didn't get into IT was I was scared of, being not techie proficient, so to say, and I think that was definitely, if I look back, I think that was definitely why I didn't want to do it, because I was thinking, I don't know coding, I don't know, how to build applications, etc. But as I've worked in IT for 7-8 years longer now, there's just so many different roles, there's so many different characters, jobs, and it's so interesting as well. And actually, it's so cutting edge, Nowadays, it's my role has definitely changed so much over the last 8 years, from being just, an A to B role, speaking just to IT managers. Nowadays, a lot more of my focus is actually speaking to IT business owners and how they can go about and resell our service, so to say. So it's more around, look, how can we help you grow your business by adding another revenue model? And again, that just makes it, instead of a A-B sell, it's an ABC sell, because now you're actually, at the top of the pyramid, and you're trying to get other people to try and go to market and resell your service. So, and trust me when I say I am not technical at all. That's not it's just not. That's where I get my technical colleagues involved, because that's their role, that's their job, so to say. My job is all around understanding, what's your problem? What's your pain? Why are we having a conversation today? How long has it been a pain? And what does the ideal solution look like? None of those questions requires me to have any, yes, it's great to have technical knowledge, but none of them means that, I need to go to university and be, get a degree in IT, so to say. So if there's one thing, definitely I would pass on to students today is, this is a great industry to be in. It's you're on the edge of something, and as I mentioned earlier, look, data. We created more data in 2020 than the entirety of history combined. That's only going to grow. As I saying, there's Moore's law, where every 2 years you're actually increasing the speed of your resistors, your CPU, your RAM, etc.
and that's only going to grow. And now we're seeing on a whole shift from being on-prem to cloud. What's next, so to say? So yeah, if there's one thing to take away, summary is educate yourself and get involved in data. The earlier the better, so to say.
Yeah, when it comes to tips, I think some of the things are quite maybe simple. As one is, checking the privacy settings and the data protection settings that you have across all your web accounts and the applications that you have. They may be a little difficult to find, but if you do some digging, I'm sure you'll be able to make your applications kind of more privacy friendly. Other tips more broadly about internet use is you can choose to use ad blockers if you don't want ads served to you and if you don't want those ads to necessarily collect some of your data. And always use two-factor authentication where you can. Use a password manager to manage any kind of long passwords that may be difficult to remember, and also to kind of limit the risks and the ability for someone to necessarily hack into your accounts, for example. And I think some of these examples have been given before in the podcast, but give out the minimum information, or sometimes even a little white lie, a bit of fake information when you're accessing products or using applications and services online. For example, when you're booking for events, do they really need your phone number? Do they really need your address? When you're buying things online, do they really even need your real name? And I think it's good, and some of these things do take time. So I would say that maybe once every 6 months, once every year, do a little internet clear out and see what kind of email list you don't need to subscribe to, or any accounts you no longer use. And finally, I'll just say that it's important to actually start the conversation with your friends and family about data protection and internet safety. Share some of the things you found out and say, hey, I didn't realize that this application did this, or oh, I just discovered this setting for this specific application. And so, if you need a topic to get you started, I'm sure sharing this podcast is a good start.
I'm not sure if I can really add much more based on what Harpal and Janice have noted. They're pretty much the pros from Dover. From my perspective, it's really simple. We talk about privacy from a context of, can someone breach it? Can someone take something away from you, take my data, whether it's through a hack or, can they use the data that I am willingly give to sell or sell access to me? For me, it's really even simpler than that. I'll give you a very simple personal example. I had a young tech founder reach out to me a while ago for investment, about 5-6 years ago. And he said to me, wow, you're really good at managing your social media presence. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I see the same photo of you everywhere. And I said, mate, that's the only one that I had taken by a professional. I had more hair and I was younger back then. So it's been done by default, right? Be very clear. Anything you put out there is out there. There is, the most important thing to me is when you put information on the web, whatever it is, you potentially lose ownership, if not guaranteed to lose ownership of that information. People are hiring now, looking on LinkedIn. It's amazing. I was involved in the recruitment space in a very funny way a decade ago. All sorts of platforms to help recruiters. LinkedIn has kind of taken ownership, right? They were bought out for over $20 billion by Microsoft for a reason. So just be aware that you are tied to your information, right? And your information is of value to someone other than yourself. So just be very, very aware of when you engage with anything digitally. The minute you put something online, you lose it. The minute you send someone a video via WhatsApp, you've lost control of that. So just think before you post, I guess would be as simple as that.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of the points everyone else said are pretty valid. Like, I would strongly suggest using an ad blocker, because not only does it help you to stop being tracked, it's also much faster because your internet won't have to load so many ads, and it also just makes browsing a all-around much better experience. And I would say if you need an ad blocker, don't use AdBlock Plus. or the really standard ones, as those have been reviewed to like be in paid partnerships with other companies to allow them to show ads on their site. So I would suggest either using uBlock Origin or AdGuard. Another point I would like to say is also do use two-factor authentication. It really does make everything more secure. So try to enable it for everything that has it. And one more thing is that I think if you don't have already, you might want to consider using a VPN, as it helps filter out like block your ISP and other really technical stuff on that, and it helps like create a private sort of like tunnel for you to browse the web from. So I'd say using a VPN is also really good to protect your privacy, and some VPNs also come with built-in ad blocking, tracker blocking, etc. So it really does help a lot. So I would say use an ad blocker, use a VPN, and enable two-factor authentication on everything.
Yep, Janice seems to be in agreement there. uBlock and Privacy Badger as well, she's chipping in with. And I have to say, Ryan, Sam Bonnekamp, our former head digital leader, is going to love hearing all that stuff, especially about the VPN stuff. He used to go on about it all the time.
Yeah, I really think everyone needs a VPN, especially a paid one. I like to say, don't use a free VPN.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that too. Well, thank you very much to all of you there. That's probably just about all that we have time for today. I'd like to thank all of our guests. That was Janice, Rayo, Harpal and Ryan for their contributions, and hope certainly that they'll be able to join us again at some point in the future. We'll be back soon with more tech-related content, including the final episode of our current series, which will feature our very own teachers. Now that's going to be Miss Mumby and Miss Beaumont, who are joining us from the Sustainability Council to discuss the symbiotic relationship between technology and sustainability. Should be a good one.
Very excited for that episode. In the meantime, dear listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. What would you like us to discuss? If you have any ideas of that sort, questions, or feedback, then please write to digileaders@webmail.sis.edu.hk. That's DIGI leaders. And as always, thanks for listening.